That's crazy. Elon Musk is now supporting an audit, so a review of the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the U.S., and that could trigger a massive Bitcoin boom. We're looking into this because there haven't been any audits here for a long time, or probably never. And now they're also looking at the central bank to see where the money is flowing. A lot of people assume that massive scandals will be uncovered here, and that's extremely sensitive. Also, you guys have exactly 24 hours until Michael Saylor announces his next Bitcoin purchase here, because he's showing a very important chart again that always indicates he's making new Bitcoin buys. In addition, massive changes in the Federal Reserve's monetary policy are on the horizon, as the Fed is at a low point with the Repo Reverse Facility. And this points to quantitative easing, meaning more liquidity in the market. And hardly anyone understands what's going on here. Increasing liquidity means rising Bitcoin prices. The QBC letter says this could actually mean that the end of quantitative easing is imminent. This could lead to a liquidity shock. And this liquidity shock could lead to rising Bitcoin prices. That means even though the Bitcoin price is stagnating right now, there's a lot of positive stuff happening behind the scenes for Bitcoin. Additionally, Counter is now buying Bitcoin again. But there's also a warning from Tether's CEO. Paul Arduino is basically expecting a Bitcoin shock of around 4 to 5 million. That there's going to be a massive supply shock, and we'll get into what he means by that later. But let's take a look at it here. Michael Saylor is back posting his dots. And that basically means that he has bought Bitcoin again. That will probably be announced tomorrow. Now, a lot of people thought, okay, Michael Saylor is going to stop buying Bitcoin. But that was the end result. It's just about regulatory stuff that he bought less Bitcoin now because there were the earnings calls, and in the end, MicroStrategy has basically changed its strategy. Now, MicroStrategy doesn't even go by MicroStrategy anymore, but just strategy. In any case, they probably shouldn't be buying Bitcoin right now. Now they're allowed to buy Bitcoin again, and now Michael Saylor is buying Bitcoin again too. So the buying spree just continues as normal. But what's really shocking here, and shouldn't be underestimated, Elon Musk supports the idea that Ron Paul is leading an audit of the Federal Reserve. So Ron Paul is also the one who has been propagating for many years enter Fed, enter Fed. So, just like Milei might want to abolish the central bank in Argentina, Ron Paul wants to do the same here in the U.S. And the central bank is an independent institution where, ultimately, many people are not allowed to have a say. Not even Donald Trump can remove Jerome Powell. They're just people who aren't really elected, but on the other hand, they're very, very powerful people. But you can't check these people, nor can you remove them. And that's basically a very, very shady story that's going on here. And that's why we definitely need transparency here. There are definitely a lot of things happening behind the scenes where you can't really tell where the money is flowing. Ron Paul basically says that it's a massive criminal organization. I don't know if he puts it that way exactly, but you can definitely infer from his theses that Ron Paul is not satisfied at all with the work of the Federal Reserve, because here, in the end, massive corruption is being carried out. And this corruption is supposed to be uncovered now. And Elon Musk supports that. And right now, we're seeing what all is coming to light with the Department of Government Efficiency. That's really insane. And it would be amazing if the US Central Bank had to disclose its position here. And here, all the scandals that have built up over the last few decades would really be uncovered. I can imagine that the central bank isn't going to let itself be pushed around so easily, because they obviously want to protect their corruption and all that. But I mean, Elon Musk already has a big lever. He's got a lot of momentum going. Maybe he can actually make a difference here. It's said that Elon Musk supports Ron Paul's push to audit the Fed. There has never been a comprehensive audit or full transparency regarding the monetary policy decisions of the Federal Reserve. FOMC meetings always take place in secret. You can't really look inside. Well, of course there are the Fed dots and things like that that you can kind of look into, but who knows if it's fake or whatever. It could also be that, in the end, 10 central banks come together, but somehow only one ends up making the decision or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how that works. In any case, there's a certain lack of transparency there. I don't want to accuse anyone here of anything. Now it's time for some examples. The Fed secretly sent $500 billion abroad in the form of currency swaps, without any oversight. When asked Fed Chair Ben Bernanke, well, this was already in the past regarding this, so Ben Bernanke admitted that no one had approved this and claimed that no approval was needed. Corruption on this scale has existed for decades. Musk support for an audit could finally bring to light what is really going on. So that's basically the crazy part about what could be coming our way. I mean, that's ultimately very, very good for Bitcoin, because that would ultimately strengthen the thesis for Bitcoin even further, when all the shady stuff from the Federal Reserve finally comes to light. And it won't just be at the Fed. It'll be in other central banks too. Look at Europe. Shout out to Christine Lagarde. Wherever you have criminal people in positions like presidents and so on, probably won't be any different there. But these are institutions that basically aren't audited. That means you're basically being completely controlled. You obviously have to file your tax return. You basically have to make every bank transfer and everything public if you're a business owner and so on. But big institutions that basically control an entire currency area, the dollar, the largest currency area in the world, they have no transparency laws in place. Or something like that. They don't have to disclose anything here. They can just do whatever they want. And if you want to get into the Federal Reserve Building, there are also videos like this. For example, people try to get into the Federal Reserve Building or something like that, but they can't get in because it's so monitored and so on. That means they don't allow any insight at all. That means you can't really peek in there. That means they keep an eye on us, but we can't check on them. And that is ultimately the beauty of Bitcoin, that transparency applies equally to everyone. And this transparency is now being demanded here at the central bank. That means it's really, really exciting. We need to keep a close eye on how this develops. And then there's an absolute bombshell here that almost nobody is aware of right now. So this graphic here is just so essential that you see it. Here it's called the Reverse Repo Facility. The Federal Reserve has dropped by about $2.5 trillion since its peak in December 2022. The US is taking on such high debt to finance its deficit spending that the Reverse Repo Facility has dropped to a low, not seen in 1,386 days. What does that mean that it has dropped to such a low over the past days? And that is now the big question. What does this mean? This is ultimately a very good sign for Bitcoin because it ultimately means that we are on the verge of quantitative tightening coming to an end, and that we're shifting back into a more liquid starting position, meaning we're likely open to quantitative easing again, which will probably pump massive liquidity back into the market. And that's also good for Bitcoin. For everyone who isn't up to speed on this, here's a quick explanation. The Reverse Repo Facility is a financial instrument of the US Federal Reserve, where money market funds and other financial institutions can park excess cash with the Fed to earn interest on it. It's used to regulate liquidity, meaning the money in the financial system. And if the instrument is used a lot here, it means that there is a lot of excess money in the system. Less usage means there's less liquidity available, because money is needed elsewhere, for example, for loans, institutions, investments, or government spending. And currently, what's happening here is that the inventory here has fallen dramatically from its peak now of $2.55 trillion here to a 4-year low. And the reason for this is that the US government is borrowing a lot of money to finance its deficit. This means less capital is being parked at the Fed because it's needed elsewhere. So you can also see it here in the chart how everything is basically winding down. And now, from the Reverse Repo Facility, it's at a low point. And now Michael Saylor is writing something very, very interesting about this. And now, basically here from the Reapers, tough word, from the Reverse Repo Facility, we're essentially at a low point. And now Michael Saylor is writing something very, very interesting about this. Here it definitely says that this could actually mean that the end of quantitative tightening is approaching. This could lead to a liquidity shock. It's also very, very important to understand. Next year, $9.2 trillion will either come due or need to be refinanced. Here in the US, and that's basically from the $36.2 million in debt that exists here. Here, 25.4%. Just let that sink in. So that means it's coming due this year and it either needs to be refinanced, or it's just coming due the debts that exist here. That means you can basically take on new debt. That would also suggest that we actually need low interest rates here because then taking on new debt is cheaper. And according to the Michael letter, this also means that, in the end, that's the reason why the gold price is currently rising, because the deficit spending is being factored in along with the uncertainties in the market. And then they made a really interesting comparison here, because now Elon Musk wants to get a handle on the deficit spending with the Department of Government Efficiency. So he basically wants to create a balanced budget, so that the US doesn't spend more money than it takes in. And that would basically be the ultimate game changer. But they really crunched the numbers here on why that's not really realistic. Elon Musk recently announced that he ultimately wants to reduce the deficit here. Where did I get the number here? That's basically $1 billion a day. In other words, he wants to reduce the deficit. But the current national debt and the current deficit here in the US is so high that the deficit would need to be reduced by $5 billion a day. And only then would you have a balanced budget. That means Elon Musk is now basically still $4 billion away. And that's definitely a big step. Where it's still lacking because then Elon Musk says we will balance it out. But you probably have to cut a lot more here and do a lot more, pulling out the chainsaw to get that done. So, in general, you have to take into account that the winding down or the training of the Reverse Repo Facility is basically happening here. It's a really, really good sign and a sign of change. And then there was actually a warning that a massive supply shock could happen with Bitcoin. And here we have the warning from the Tether CEO, Paul Arduino. This is already happening. Community noted because someone just picked out a quote from him but didn't quote the whole thing, which is really relevant to what he's saying. This is about quantum computing, and it is not a threat for the next few years, but rather 20 years, 30 years, and so on. And it's also not a danger for Bitcoin, but it could still lead to a certain supply shock here. But it's not that the supply is melting away, rather that a massive supply is being thrown onto the market. He basically says here, he has a prediction here, namely, that with quantum computing there is still a significant risk of cracking Bitcoin cryptography. Before it becomes a serious threat, Bitcoin will eventually get quantum-resistant addresses. So he basically says that quantum computers aren't a problem because even if it becomes an issue, it won't be a problem anytime soon. But if it does become a problem, you can just make protocol changes. A couple of months ago, there were those big articles that spread that fear. Yeah, quantum computers can mess up Bitcoin and all that. No, nothing's going to happen. You just have to implement certain new address formats that are basically quantum resistant. But now he says here, all living people and everyone who has access to their wallets will move Bitcoins to new quantum resistant addresses. All Bitcoins in lost wallets, including Satoshi, unless they are alive, will be hacked and put back into circulation. So when the time comes, it could take 20 years, 30, 40 years, or it might only take about 15 years. I really can't gauge that. In the end, there will be new addresses, and these addresses will be quantum resistant. And you can send the Bitcoins to these addresses, and then you'll be on the safe side. Then in the end, the problem is there are now huge honeypots like Satoshi addresses where 1 million Bitcoin or so are lying around. And if Satoshi Nakamoto is dead, which many assume, then he can't send the Bitcoins to the new addresses. That also means that these Bitcoins are likely to come back into circulation because right now the Bitcoins are just, let's say, lost like in a boating accident. That means they aren't being moved, they aren't being sold, and they aren't being sent to exchanges. And accordingly, there's no selling pressure here. But if these addresses can be easily hacked by quantum computing, like I said, that's 20, 30 years down the line or so, then it means we're going to face a massive supply shock, but not in a good way, rather in a bad way. That means that there's more supply in the market than there is demand here. I mean, just imagine if a hacker were to crack that million Bitcoin, then he could just dump it over the course of a year. Or something like that, the million coins would just keep getting sold on exchanges. I mean, he's not going to do it all at once because he obviously doesn't want to create any slippage. So he obviously wants to get the best possible price out of this. And he won't get that if he sells it all at once. So he sells it over the course of a year or maybe over 2 years or something like that. And that would definitely create a lot of price pressure over a longer period of time. And on top of that, it's not just Satoshi's Bitcoins that are lost, but maybe other people who also can't move their Bitcoins to quantum-resistant addresses. That also means that all the lost Bitcoins are still out there. There could be 3, 4, 5 million Bitcoin potentially. Let's say, probably not all at once, but maybe over a span of 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, or something like that, dumped onto the market. And that's definitely a certain danger that you should keep in mind, but that's still just a thing of the future. Just something for you to take away. Feel free to let me know what you think about that. And then, very, very important, if you're looking for a tax tool that's highly recommended, it's one where you can easily track your taxes, where you can also track your portfolio, and where you can generate tax reports. And in the end, if you want to have a massively good overview of your Bitcoin income and expenses, then I absolutely recommend coin tracking. It's completely free. You can even sign up here anonymously. You can sign up without using your name or anything like that. You just need an email address. And then you can generate tax reports here. You can also see which coins are tax-free and which ones aren't yet. That's why I always recommend coin tracking. And here, with the code COTEL, you can get a discount if you sign up for a subscription. But it's free to start with. It only costs once you exceed a certain number of trades. Absolutely recommended. And if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, with the code, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. See you later. Peace out.